Listen, don't have a bunch of time to waste, or you're going to find that we run real short towards the end of class. Here's what I want to see for work. And it may seem silly, but there are people that are still making silly mistakes, and it's hard to follow where you're at. So, as simple as it may be, every single time, I want the name of the shape and its corresponding formula. If it's a rectangle, write down it's a rectangle. If it's a triangle, write down it's a triangle. Write the corresponding formula that goes along with it. Okay? Write down the values that you use. The length, the width, the height. Then you can show what? Your answer, whatever it comes out to. Because if you substituted it into the formula, you've shown those values, all that's left is the number crunching, right? Listen, even if you're getting a lot of them right, I'm going to tell you, you can stop from making simple mistakes if you get in the habit of doing them all where you're writing down the name of the shape, the formula, the pieces that you plugged into the formula, then the answer. There's a couple reasons that this will work this way. Number one is it does give you a way to go back and look at it when we've worked a problem out here. You'll know exactly where you made a mistake at, if you made one. I'm going to tell you, the minute you start recognizing your mistake versus me telling you where you made the mistake, you're going to learn more from that by far than you would if I have to show you where your mistake was. The minute you recognize, oh, I used the diameter instead of the radius, or the minute you recognize, I forgot this is a semicircle, I forgot to divide by 2, versus me having to come by and say, you forgot to divide by 2. There's a big difference in the learning when you recognize where the mistake is. There's about 3 people in here that did all of their work the way I did it on the board. All the rest of you have work, at least in this class. My other class had nothing. They had answers. Wow. So you're by far better off than where they were, right? But I'm going to tell you that if you get in the habit of doing this, it's going to be easy to find where you made a mistake. And then on top of it, how long is it going to take before you have the formulas memorized?
I memorized them.
Okay? Not going to take long to memorize them if you get used to writing them down every time, is it? And one of the things we're still struggling with is, if I say, what's the formula for a semicircle, about half of you won't know it. How many people actually know the formula for a semicircle? Raise your hand. Oh, so more than half of you don't know it. Okay? Brent, what is it?
Pi r squared divided by 2.
Right. Semicircle would be pi r squared divided by 2. Okay. There are the answers. I'll go over about maybe 3 or 4 of these at the most, so that we have time to talk about what we're going to talk about today. Take a quick look at your answers. Again, I'll gladly go over some of them. On problem number 3, you have to decide how you want to divide this odd shape out. You want to divide it vertically or horizontally? You want to divide it vertically. It's certainly okay to do that. I'm going to label my 2 shapes. What's my first shape? What shape is it? Rectangle. You're going to notice, what did I write down? The shape. What's the formula?
Length times width.
Base times height or length times width. Okay? What is the base The whole thing was 5. If I've used 3 of it up, this is what? 2. And the height is 4. The next one is also a what? A rectangle. And it's got a base and a height. What's the height? It's actually 3. And the width is 3. It's actually not a rectangle, it's a what? Square. And what would I do with these two numbers now? Add them together. 8 plus 9, which is 17.
I got 22.
Okay. Can you see where you made your mistake?
I did mine different.
Okay.
I cut it like make it smaller.
I did it this way.
Yeah, me too.
And when you do it that way, this shape is still 2 by 1. This shape would have been 3 by 5. What's 3 by 5? 15. What's 2 by 1? 2. What's 15 and 2? 17. Okay? How many shapes?
2. Half circles.
Okay. Shape 1 is a rectangle. Area is base times height. What's the base? 6. What's the height?
4.
Shape 2 is a semicircle. We already said that was pi r squared divided by 2. Okay. I'm going to tell you, there's been today 2 common mistakes on this problem. They either forgot to divide by 2 because it's a semicircle, or they used the wrong radius. What is the radius?
Half of the,
What is the radius? If this whole thing is 4, what's the radius?
2.
What's the radius? 2 pi times 2 squared divided by 2. This would be 6.28. And what would I do with these two numbers? Add them together. 30.28. Should be 30.28. 24 and 6.28 added together. Okay? Julie? For which? This part? If you ended up with 12.56, one of 2 things happened. You didn't divide by 2. Is that it? Do you see? And you did 2 things. Or 1. You probably did 4 squared instead of 2 squared. And again, if you've shown the steps like this, you're going to be able to see where your mistake is. And if you can't see it, what haven't you shown? You haven't shown enough work. If you can't see where your mistake is, you're not showing enough steps so you can figure out where you're making a mistake. Because I've shown everything except the number that comes out of the calculator. That I put down as my answer. Number 7. How many shapes? 2. What's the formula for a rectangle? Base times height. What's the base? 18. What's the height?
8.
18 times 8. Somebody do it.
144.
144? Shape 2. Half of a circle. Area equals pi r squared divided by 2. We have to be careful when we're finding the radius again. If this whole part was 18, I've used 6 here, I've used 6 here, then the part that's left in the middle is also what? 6. But what's the radius? 3. So this would be 3.14 times 3 times 3 divided by 2. 3.14 times 3 times 3 divided by 2. 14.13. What do I do with these two numbers? I add them together. And again, this was in feet, so this would be feet what?
Square.
Feet squared. Go turn around. Come on, turn around. Everybody understands that if you'll show all the steps, then it's easy to find out where you made a mistake. But you see it? Okay. This is number 9. How many shapes? 2. What are my 2 shapes? Rectangle. Area equals base times height. What's my base? What's my height? My area of my rectangle is 150. The semicircle. Area equals pi r squared divided by 2. What's the radius? 5. If it's 10 all the way across, then it's 5 on each piece. Radius is 5. 3.14 times 5 times 5 divided by 2. 39.25. What do I do with these two numbers? I add them together. 189.25. It wasn't feet, so this would be feet what? Squared. Pretty good? What are we going to do? Write down the name. Write down the formula. Show the values that I put in, then work out to the answer. That's the order in which we need to do these.
One more time.
You may. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to put everything down. I don't want you to do anything except stare at the shape that's on the board. How many of you saw it do something? If we stare at it long enough, all of you will see it change. Okay? Here's the problem. You're working with a 3D shape in 2 dimensions. You only have a length and a width. We don't actually have a what? We actually don't have a height. And it doesn't move. It obviously doesn't move. Right? But your perception of where it is at changes. It happens when you blink, or if for one reason or another your focal point changes ever so little, what used to look like the front becomes the back or the left or the right. And the longer you stare at it, believe it or not, the more it'll change. I mean, it'll continue to change the more you stare at it.
How is it doing this?
Okay. So, listen, here's what's important to recognize. Today, we're going to start dealing with three-dimensional shapes and talking about surface area. It's still area, and surface area means how much would it take to cover up the entire shape. How many faces does that have? 6. So you could unfold it, so to speak, and count all 6 faces and calculate the area of all 6. Wouldn't you think there's an easier way to do that?
Yeah.
And there is. But here's the problem that you're going to run into. The concept of what people determine to be the height of something and what is actually the height may be 2 different things. It's really noticeable with a cylinder. Okay? Cylinder has the same basic properties as any prism. It has 2 faces that are exactly the same, and they're parallel to each other. Okay? The height of the cylinder, then, is the distance between the 2 circles. Okay? So if I set this on the table, circle side down, the height is what we think of it as being, the distance from the table to the top. What if I lay it this way? What's the height?
The distance from the circle.
It's still the distance between the 2 circles, isn't it? The same thing happens with a prism. It's no different than you. JW, how tall are you?
5.
5 foot. Okay? If you lay down, does your height change?
Yeah.
Does your height change if you lay down?
It don't change, but yeah.
No, it doesn't change at all. You're still how tall? 5 foot. The concept of height we think of as being from the floor to the top of the object. But height is the distance from one base to the other. The base of you is your feet. The other base is your head. So it's from your feet to your head. Whether you're standing up, leaning sideways, it's still that distance. So the important thing for today, obviously, is going to be make sure that we learn the formula, because there is another formula for surface area today. And learning how to separate things out, so we're not trying to deal with all 3 dimensions. We're really only dealing with 2 dimensions and separating the height out all by itself. Okay? So in a cylinder, we'd separate out the circle as the base, and we'd use the height as one singular number. We're going to separate it out. The problem you run into is when you're dealing with something like a rectangular prism. I could look at it this way as the 2 bases, because they're congruent and they're parallel, and this would be the height. But if I blink, I might see it this way. Now these would be the 2 bases, and this would be the what? The height. And if I blink again, I might see it this way. There's 3 different ways that you can look at a rectangular prism. Will it make a difference in your overall surface area? The answer is no. If you separate out the height and you separate out whatever that base shape is, and you work out the base shape, you're going to end up with the same answer without having to figure out 6 different pieces to put together. Okay? So, there is the formula for today. S equals pH plus 2B. Well, write it down. Did I give you an answer?
Yeah.
Now, I've asked everybody to write down the formulas. There's at least 3 people that have not written anything yet.
No?
Oh, wow.
Okay. Listen, this is what's important to know about the formula. What do the letters represent? Obviously, S is the what? Surface area. Okay? This P and this B are coming from the same shape. It's the area of the base, and it's the perimeter of the base. If it was a cylinder, the base shape would be what shape? A circle. And we, instead of finding perimeter, would find circumference. If I was doing this prism, and I hold it up this way, what's the base shape? The base shape? Rectangle. And the height would be here, and I wouldn't have to worry about this square that's here. Okay? I'd find the perimeter all the way around the outside of this rectangle that's on the bottom. I'd find the area of this rectangle that's on the bottom, and I'd use this height to calculate my surface area. The first thing you're going to want to identify in the picture or in the words is this. You're going to want to find that height. It will be given to you. They're going to give it to you. I promise you they're going to give it to you. The next thing you want to do is separate out whatever that base shape might be. It might be a rectangle, it might be a square, it might be an L-shaped, it might be a trapezoid, whatever it is, separate it out. Because when you separate this out, all of the work is going to come from that shape. You're going to calculate the perimeter from that shape, you're going to calculate the area of that shape, and then you're going to plug numbers into a formula. But the hardest part that you're going to have to do is going to come from whatever shape we separate out. Okay? Now, if you'll open your packet to the first you try, number 3. Now, I picked one that was strictly a word problem because a lot of times when we see word problems, people don't even attempt them, and yet they don't have to be that hard. What did they ask us to find? What did they ask us to find? Not the area, but the surface area. First thing we should do, write down what? The formula. pH plus 2B. What did they tell me the height was?
1.5 inches.
And I'm going to write that down as 1.5. Since they're talking about a box of spaghetti, what overall shape was this box of spaghetti? It was a rectangular prism. Okay? And the height is what? 1.5. What's the shape then of the base of this? Is it square, rectangular? What is it? It's a rectangle. And we're going to separate out that rectangle because P and B are both going to come from that shape. Now, what did they tell me the length of my rectangle was?
9 inches.
9 inches. What did they tell me the width of my rectangle was?
2 inches.
If this is 9, how big is it on the top? 9. If the left is 2, how big is the right?
2.
Everybody with me on what I separated out?
Yes.
Two things are going to come from this shape. The perimeter of the base and the area of the base. The height they already gave me. It's a completely different number. Okay? How do I find perimeter?
You add them all.
I add them all together, all the way around the outside. 2 plus 9 plus 2 plus 9. 22. Everybody with me on how I got the perimeter? The reason they use this capital B instead of giving you the formula is the shape of the base may be different. Next time it may be a trapezoid. The formula would be different. Next time it might be a circle. Would be different. So, the formula for a rectangle says that I do length times width, or base times height of this. What's my length and width? 9 and 2. So my base area is 18. Once I have these three pieces of information, I have P, I have B, and I have H. All I have to do is plug them into the formula. S equals, what do I put in place of P? What do I put in place of P? 22. What do I put in place of H? 1.5. 2 times, what do I put in place of P? 18. 22 times 1.5, 33. 2 times 18, 36. And what do I do with these two numbers? Add them together. We are still talking about area, so this would be inches squared. Everybody understand? Write the formula down. Find the height, which they are going to give you. Separate out the shape of the base. P and B will come from that shape. Once you find P and B, the hard part is done. All you've got left to do is plug in numbers. I'm going to tell you, if you don't write down all of these steps, you will get confused with surface area. You need to get in the habit of writing down each individual piece. And again, when we go over it, if you've made a mistake, it'll be easy to find where you made your mistake if you do it in this fashion. Everybody understand? You good? Okay. I want you to flip to the guided practice where number 6 is.
You got independent practice?
It may be, yeah. You see it, this problem? I picked one that was a word problem. I picked one that's kind of an oddball shape. And I've done this so we can talk about what height is. Remember, the height is the distance between the two shapes that are exactly the same and parallel to each other. Okay? So, the two shapes that are the same is this L shape that's in the front, and there's an L shape that's kind of here in the back. What separates the two L's? What separates them? What distance? That's your height. It's not this 3 that's your height. That's part of the L. The part that's not part of the L, that's your what? Your height. What haven't I written down yet?
The base.
What haven't I written down
The
yet?
formula.
Remember, in the formula, the first thing we find is the height, and then we separate out the shape of that base. That base is L-shaped. P and B come from that shape. And I'm going to put in the dimensions they gave me. The bottom of the L was 3. The left side of the L was 3. The top of the L was 1. The right side was 1. Everybody with me when I redrew it? Understand why I put the numbers where I put them.
So you would like do the same thing 3 times? The height is the same.
What number is going to take up this space? 2, because if the whole thing was 3 and I've used up 1, this is 2. How about this space?
2.
It's also 2. Listen, P and B both come from this L-shaped figure. How do I find the perimeter? Add them all together. I'd take 3 plus 3 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1. All the way around the outside. It's 12. Now, in this base shape, is it a rectangle, a square, or is it one of these composite figures? It's a composite figure. I have to decide where I want to split it. It doesn't matter where. I can split it horizontally, I can split it vertically. Doesn't matter. I'm going to split it horizontally. The rectangle that's on the left, how big is it? 3 times 1, which is 3. The rectangle that's to the right, how big is it? 2 by 1, which is 2. So the total base area is 5. Listen, once I have this number, P, I have this number, B, and they gave me this number, H. What do I have left to do? Put them into the formula. S equals, what do I put in place of P? 12. What do I put in place of H? 3. Plus 2 times what? 2 times 5. 12 times 3? 36. 2 times 5? 10. 46 what? Inches squared. Listen, if you do it this way, you really only have to calculate the perimeter and the base of this shape. If you unfolded it and you try to calculate all the individual faces, you'd have 2 L-shaped faces that you'd have to calculate, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more rectangles. You'd have to calculate 8 areas of the individual pieces and add them all together. Would you rather calculate the perimeter and the area of a base from one shape, or would you rather have to add 8 pieces together to get to the answer? This is much simpler. Okay? And the hard work comes from separating out what? That one shape. And being able to clearly identify what the height is. Okay? Now, the first question that's on your sheet, okay? Number 1, right off of your homework sheet. Am I good with this one?
Wait, so there aren't like numbers.
Just a minute. Am I good? This goes back to what I was trying to show you at the beginning. When I draw this out, it may look like a different bottom to you. And the height may look different to you. And if you stare at it long enough, it's likely to switch faces. Would you like to stay in my classroom or would you like to leave? Then be quiet. Okay. If you stare at it long enough, it will switch. You have to decide what you want as the height. Pick one of the three numbers. It really doesn't matter. Julie, pick one.
5.
I'm going to say my height then is what? 5. Once I've done that, I'm going to separate out the other rectangle. How big is the other rectangle? 3 by 7. P and B is going to come from this. Okay? And it wouldn't have mattered if I separated out my height and I said my height was 5. 3 by 7. If I said my height was 3, my rectangle would have been 5 by 7. It's not going to matter how you do it. If it's a rectangular prism, pick one of the three numbers as your height, put the other two on your base. No matter whether we do it 3 different ways or we all do it the same way, we're all going to get to the same end answer. Are we good?
Yes, sir.
So what are you going to work on for homework? The worksheet. And there's what? 6 total questions.
Right now, what did you say?